And thank you to NEED and to TPI for including impact investing as part of this symposium. And I am thrilled, what a privilege to follow Malala as our keynote speaker. And we have a change to announce in the panel. This is going to be a conversation between Amy and myself because our other panelist, Sam Bonsey, has a very unexpected new delivery, a baby boy. And the baby boy came 5 weeks early, so understandably, he's focused on his new baby rather than our panel. But Amy and I are delighted to have this time to carry on a conversation with you and with each other. And we heartily invite you to submit any of the questions that you want us to address in the chat box. But if we don't hear from you, we're just going to carry on our conversation. So I would like to start by giving you a little bit of an overview on impact investing. And before I do that, though, I'm going to ask you to do the work and to get engaged. So we're going to ask you 2 questions in the polling section. And from the video, you should all be experts now. So if you go to the right-hand side of your screen to the polling section, we're going to ask you to start with question 1. So Amy and I will have a little idea of how much you already know about impact investing and where you are in the spectrum. So would you please go to the first polling question? You should have it in front of you now. And we're asking you to tell us how involved you are with impact investing. And you have 5 choices. Choose one. Choose the one that's most applicable. I don't think I'm going to go through and read them all. They're pretty self-explanatory, but it would give us a little bit of background on you and give us a little better idea of how to frame some of the conversation that we're about to begin. So I'm going to give you a few minutes now. Enter your selections, and then you should be able to see the results instantaneously. So you will know a little bit, not only about Amy and myself, but the other people on the call. So would you please begin the poll now? Well, it looks like we're having a little bit of a problem with the polling question. We had asked you to respond to question 1, but it doesn't matter. We'll just go ahead. So I apologize to those of you who already know a lot about impact investing, but I'm just going to go ahead and refresh for everybody on the call the definition that we're using for impact investing, because it's a real general, broad definition. And you will see when I start talking a little bit about the size of the market that it's really a broad tent, as they say. So the definition that we're going to be using today is the one that has been used most generally by the Global Impact Investing Network, GIN. And those basically investments intended to generate a positive, measurable benefit, social and environmental, alongside a financial return. So the scope is very broad, emerging markets all the way to developed markets. It is public markets as well as private markets, passive, active, and direct investments. And the financial returns, anywhere from below market concessionary returns to commercial rates, whatever that means in a low interest environment. And then in terms of the investment structures, that's the fun part, where we're coming up with innovative new structures every day, and hybrid models, and different ways to express our values through our investments. So that's a real broad definition. And in terms of the capital sources, many of you on the call today, and definitely at this symposium, and I'm thrilled to hear that we've got over 300 people that have registered for this symposium. So they broadly represent the capital sources for impact investing, all the way from personal and family offices, foundations, but then also donor advised funds, retirement funds, and a lot of the nonprofits, the corporate investors, and faith-based organizations, again, matching values and the investments, but also development agencies, the World Bank, and a lot of the big international finance institutions and governments. So really broad sources of capital. And I told you that with that very broad definition, you're going to get varying estimates of the size of the market. So if you're ready for this, okay, starting with the largest one, the World Bank estimated that in 2020, not only is impact investing large and expanding, but it's now estimated at $2.5 trillion. But that's still a very small portion of the overall global assets under management, which are estimated at 115 trillion. So fast growing, large, but still very small compared to the total number of assets. Now, a smaller estimate, and probably more relevant for us, with the audience today, and with a lot of people doing private investments and direct investments, is the estimate from the Global Impact Investing Network. And that is 715 billion. And that's spread out over 1.7 thousand organizations. But most of those are North America, US and Canada, very little Sub-Saharan Africa, which you're going to be hearing about from Amy, and you would have been hearing from Sam and myself. Even less in Latin America, about 4%, and even less in Southeast Asia, 3%. Now, the other area that is growing very fast is blended finance. So in addition to what we've been talking about with impact investing, the idea of blended finance is much more catalytic. And that means where the governments and philanthropists provide catalytic capital to entice and encourage and motivate a lot more of the private capital. So it's the 3 Ps, philanthropic, public, and private. And that is estimated now at about 161 billion, but it's growing very rapidly. So that's what I'm going to say about impact investing. If you have more questions, certainly you can add that to the chat box, and either we'll try to respond today. If we don't have time, we'll correspond afterwards. But very evolving and innovative asset class, if you can call it that. So that's enough on the overview. And I don't know if we've resolved the polling question now, but we can move on. We will just assume that you didn't mind too much having a little bit of an overview if you already know what we're talking about. But the fun part now is introducing our analyst, who is now going to be our conversationalist, and that is Amy Brakeman. And I'm absolutely thrilled because Amy is going to be able to cover a lot of the information about the impact investing across the spectrum. And I'm also thrilled because of what she's actually put into action. It's not just words. And there's a lot of talking about impact investing, but Amy's been out there doing it. She's been working with African social entrepreneurs since 2005 and has been impact investing since 2017. And she's heading to 100% invested in impact. And she co-leads 3 impact investing peer circles. And by the way, she's a lead member. So am I. And she's president of the Umsizi Fund, and she'll tell you about that. She's an advisory council member of the Africa Leadership Academy. Very exciting. And again, in her introduction, she'll mention what she does for them, and an advisory board member of the African Visionary Fund. So Amy, I am thrilled to have you. I'm just going to mention a little bit about Sam, and he's with us in spirit with his new son and his wife. But Sam is a co-founder and executive director of the Impact. And he's also a board member of Spark Microfinance, micro grants. And he has a personal and family portfolio of impact investments, as well as being a great influencer as part of the Impact, trying to motivate members of his organization to invest. It's a global network of families to make more impact investments and to make those investments more effectively. And he's been with them since inception for 7 years. And the Spark Microgrants is a community-driven model providing assistance and seed grants to accelerate rural progress in East and West Africa. So we miss Sam, but at least we got Amy here. And Amy, I am now going to ask you to tell us why you moved from philanthropy to impact investing, how you did it, a little bit about your personal story, please. And take your time.
Thank you.
Really here to hear yours.
Thank you all for joining in. I was looking down a lot while Pat was talking because I was trying to see who's on the line. So I see a lot of people I know, and hello. Excited to see you and meet new people. And of course, Malala is a tough act to follow, but we'll do our best. I'm trying to shift the way I communicate from being this very logical, there's the 3 reasons why, blah, blah, which is really boring, to practice being a storyteller. So you're going to be my inaugural guinea pigs. So we're going back to 4th grade. I'll make it quick. But in 4th grade, I learned I needed to make money because my closest friends got to go to Girl Scout camp on Catalina Island, and I didn't get to go. I couldn't afford to go. Catalina's in Southern California. They came back so excited about the wild boars that like ran through camp in the middle of the night. And I said, I'm not going to miss out on stuff again. This is too much fun. I mean, I was lucky. I wasn't a really deprived child in terms of I didn't have to contribute to rent or food or things that children around the world have to do. Nonetheless, I got the message that If I wanted to have opportunities and social connection and adventure in my life, I was going to have to make money. So I marched on that path. I married a man who also had a drive for making money. We had business jobs. We were paid well, we saved, and then we co-invested it. And it really grew because the capitalist system is geared so that people like me will end up with a lot of money. And I would argue a really unjust, unfair amount of money, given that it's, we built that wealth in like 20 years. So I'd say the next shift was when I became a mom. I said, you know what? I don't really want to do this business stuff anymore. I don't want to work that hard. I don't financially need to. So I started working with nonprofits. So that's when I started kind of looking around, what could I do? What could be helpful? And I started working with nonprofits in the Boston area and in US. And I found they really wanted me primarily to introduce them to other wealthy people and help them raise money. And I don't want to do that. I wanted to be creative. I wanted to be a problem solver. I wanted to be a partner. I had different aspirations of what my contribution would be. So when I first went to South Africa in 2005 was City Year, when they had opened the South African operation, I met a social entrepreneur. I fell in love with just, it could be going back to the wild boars, the adventure, the excitement, something totally new, but way more than that, way more than adventure. It was deep connection, partnering. And then my ex-husband, but my husband and I got involved and spent 15 years doing really creative work in Africa. So we can talk about that. That blends, it's very creative philanthropy, and it blends impact investing and philanthropy, and be happy to talk about that. The area I know the most about is building education to employment pathways that help youth find livelihoods and dignity. Because school is wonderful, but unfortunately in many of these economies, education is not sufficient. So Act 3, I got divorced. Oh my God. And all of a sudden, my asset manager, who was my husband, was not my asset manager anymore. I mean, he probably would have been, but it was time for me to wake up. And this is what I think is common to a lot of us, because we're all on this line, really working hard to achieve transformative impact on this planet. And I woke up to the fact that I think I had 6% of the assets that I controlled or influenced were dedicated to the public good at that point, at the time of my divorce, even though we were doing some impact investing at that point in time and had done some PRIs, and it wasn't just grant making. So 6% I thought was good, going to the public good. And I'm like, holy shit, that's a drop in the bucket. I got 94% that I gotta move. So that's why when Pat read my stats about, 2005 starting in philanthropy, 2017 starting in impact investing, I'm a beginner, but I'm an action taker. So, now with that same passion that I learned, I gotta make some money. Now I have that same passion and dedication to figuring out how I'm gonna use that money for the greatest impact. And I think maybe this would be the time I think that for me, it'll be forever, for the rest of my life, I will be focused on deepening the impact of my assets and figuring out how do I do spend down things? How do I, the goal of my assets for me, and every family and individual and foundation gets to make their own decision. The goal is not for me to amass the most wealth to pass on to charity at my death or to pass on to my children. The goal is to try to figure out how to have the most impact with the resources I have. And that's money, that's voice, that's political power, that's, reading all these wonderful books about racial justice and decolonizing wealth. And so anyway, I'd say for me, it's going to be peeling layers of the onion forever, finding new partners. I have added 2 new advisors to my team this year. I don't staff up. I use consultants and advisors. And so I really dove in then in 2020 to work on racial justice investing. And I think that's where I've started to be invited to things, because I really moved a lot of money last year and talked about it a lot. So I think that's where I started getting invited to be on panels like this. So I'm happy to talk about any of that is of interest to you, but to keep things short, I think I'll stop there.
Wow, thank you so much. And you are a woman of action. I love it. That's great. And we got a lot more to get into, and particularly specific examples and what kinds of investments you're making to realize this impact. But let me tell you a little bit about why I have been in impact investing. And I would say that my goal in emerging markets, private equity and venture capital, predates the terminology for impact investing. It's why I got involved in it. And going back even further, not I didn't go to Girl Scout camp, Amy, but I grew up in the Catholic faith, and I really believe that that's what formed the actually spread the seeds for impact investing, because as a Catholic, it's not an option for us. We're baptized into a certain number of really strong principles, like the dignity of each human being and the common good and solidarity with our brothers and sisters in need. And so with that really strong base, then the civil rights movement in the 60s, I got involved. I'm 73 now, so I got involved when I was in high school. And I think the civil rights movement really helped form my attitude about not just giving money away, but actually eradicating the root causes of racial injustice, personal and systemic. And then the experience I had in managing assets at a private equity fund in emerging markets over the last 20 years, it really gave me the tools, some of the innovative tools to eradicate some of these root causes of injustice, not just with money, but with sustainable solutions. And everybody knows the story about you give me a fish and I can eat for one day. You teach me how to fish, I can eat for a lifetime. But if you invest in my fish processing plant, I can hire people, I can promote them, train them. So it's this whole idea of sustaining the livelihoods of people and moving them beyond charity. We need charity, and please don't anyone leave this session today thinking that we're not advocates for philanthropy. Somebody who's in abject poverty, you don't ask them to write a business plan. But those of us who can help write business plans and really reach out to the brilliant young entrepreneurs that we're finding all over the world. And Amy, I'm sure we'll talk in a minute about some of the entrepreneurs she's met through her work in Africa, and I can share those experiences. But I also want to tell you that I learned something from our Pope Francis. We've had 3 conferences now at the Vatican with this group I work with called Catholic Impact Investing Collaborative, and it's trying to pool capital from the Catholic Church. And when you start aggregating how much capital there is in the church across the hospitals, the schools, the religious organizations, the Vatican Bank, it's a huge amount. And we met with the Pope, who advocated for impact investing back in 2014. And he said, use wealth to serve the poor. Amen. Yes, Pope Francis. So I have been working in impact investing now ever since I retired about 5 or 6 years ago, busier than ever. And I think that one of the things that I would add, Amy, to what you said in your story and what Sam said in his, is that the real potential that I see with some of these Catholic organizations is not just how much money they have in their endowments and foundations and pension funds, but a lot of the programs that are grants and philanthropy and recipients of money from the government or other nonprofit agencies are now thinking about moving much toward a sustainable solution. What happens when the grants run out? What happens when you lift people out of poverty with grants and the grant runs out and you drop them back into poverty? That's almost worse. So at any rate, I'm very excited about the hybrid models, and I'm going to now return to Amy and ask her about this whole transition from philanthropy to impact investing. Not that we abandon philanthropy, but we complement it. Amy, would you share with us your insights about that?
Okay, I wanted to share with you guys one of the things in preparation for this panel was that they asked if there were any resources we wanted to make sure you knew about. So if we can put up the Just Transition slide now, I wanted to make sure you know that about Justice Funders put together this wonderful way of thinking about. This is really designed for philanthropic grants, but I use the same framework, and many of us, like Addisina Social Capital, adapted it for impact investing as well. But the idea is, you know, we're moving along a spectrum. I don't use the language of concessionary returns anymore, because that to me means we're looking at it so one-dimensional. It's a one-dimensional problem. It isn't. It's multidimensional. You know, there can be really high impact with high returns. There can be low returns with lower impact, and everything in between. So what I love about this is the way I believe. I believe that I had blinders on, and I believed the story about that business does good for society, and I did all that and had a business career. And so where we started with, you know, philanthropy and everything was what I would call more extractive on the orange side of the slide. I don't know how many of you have already read this. I know it's well known, but I just want you to understand that where I'm going, and many people and the kind of allies I want to work with, is we're on this journey to go from a role of capital where individuals and institutions like foundations have the right or make it their goal to endlessly accumulate capital and make decisions on how it should be allocated for the public good. The preservation of wealth and power must be prioritized over the needs of the people and in the environment. And then underneath that, you can read it yourself, but it's all about these power dynamics, that the people with the assets are the ones who are the wise decision makers, and that we are the ones who should be making the decisions about who gets the money. And there's such a huge power imbalance. So if you move along to less extractive, restorative, regenerative, transformational, you know, I'm on this journey. You could say, so I probably moved with my first set of impact advisors, my money, you know, I'm using this now for impact investing, this framework, but it's true of philanthropy too. I've moved the way I do philanthropy, and I've moved the way that I do impact investing to finding processes and systems where I'm not the center decision maker. For example, in philanthropy, in Boston, we have these amazing trifecta of institutions and more: Center for Economic Democracy, Boston Ujima Project, Boston Impact Initiative. And if you don't know about them and you are in New England, I'd recommend you take a look at them, because they are really committed to justice and merging movement building with philanthropy and investing. And so where I'm trying to move is like, okay, less extractive kind of philanthropy or investments. Maybe I'll talk about one at a time. So less extractive philanthropy would be, you know, my awakening, that I'm starting to give away as I notice that I had wealth, that I'm starting to give away wealth. But still, I'm really preserving power and wealth. And I'm making some impact. As I move to the right, I am making decisions that I am allocating capital into pools so that other grassroots leaders and social entrepreneurs will decide how that capital gets deployed. And communities, I think to me, what I've learned really in the past year is I thought I was patting myself on the back because I moved a lot of investments into philanthropy and venture capital funds and private equity funds that were led by people of color and led by first-time fund managers. And, I thought I was doing really the hero's work. And then the more I kept learning, unless we're really moving further along, it's great to shift funds and capital to individual entities. But if we're not really moving further, that we're empowering communities and groups of individuals and pulling all the different stakeholders, that is what Pat refers to like blended capital or integrated capital. If we're not breaking down silos to come together in a new way that really gives more power and access to resources, access to knowledge, social capital to the communities that we're trying to assist, then I'm not done yet. I need to keep working along there. So I can give you, if it's of interest, I can give you specific examples of philanthropic grants I've made that are moving me towards regenerative. Transformational is like a whole higher plane. And I can give you examples of philanthropy. I can give you examples of impact investments. But that's why I say it's going to take me forever, because I've never been in, when my divorce happened, my money, I got it in cash. So it wasn't like I just did that divestment thing first. I never did the divestment thing. Or ESG screens. Like I have moved to how can I put work money in a way through all asset classes that it's actually having an impact, not just screening out some negative stuff, that it's having a positive impact. So I think I'll stop there, take a breath. I will show you actually the next page, please, the endowment specific piece of this framework. So there are many elements of moving from extractive to regenerative and transformational. But for this panel on impact investing, I thought, let's look at the endowment in particular. And since we haven't seen the polls, I don't know how many of you are working on the program side of foundations, the investment side of foundations. I was hoping to have a sense of, the first polling questions we were hoping to put up were to help us understand who you are, so that we're really speaking to who you are and what your opportunities are. But anyway, so again, along that same thing, extractive. Endowments that are more extractive, and many of us start there. I did. I'm sure we all did at some degree in the history of these foundations. They're invested in except maybe the faith-based people. Thank you to you, Pat. You guys led the charge with this, not being extractive ever, maybe, hopefully. Endowments are invested in for-profit companies that cause social, economic, and environmental devastation to communities around the world. And the purpose is to maximize financial returns on the foundation so that it can exist in perpetuity and have more assets to control, and that you're only paying out 5% a year, because that's what's the minimum requirement. So, we all know that's harmful. And I don't put this out to flagellate any of us, because we're all doing the best we can. We're all committed to this. But I think these kind of frameworks, talking about it with, if those of you are like, if you're, many of you on this call, if you're actually program related staff at foundations, you might feel like you don't have a lot of influence over how the foundation's assets are invested. But even using your voice to get this discussion to happen, to have people take a look at, like, where do we think, both on the philanthropic grant making side and on the asset management side, where are we on this framework of from extractive to less extractive to regenerative? And so you guys have all read it by now, but this is the path that I'm on, both with my philanthropy and with my impact investing. And then I'm seeing I got a question. Yes, participatory grant making. I have done some of that. And in fact, I was just a member of the Need Racial Justice Giving Circle, which was wonderful, mainly because it was so well curated that we got to meet monthly, and it gave me the impetus to actually read some of these articles that were on my back burner about colonization and the history of how we got from the way the world was to the way it is now. So yeah, I've done that and I like it. I think that would be somewhere in less extractive or restorative in my mind. It's not all the way. All the way is what I'm now doing with this solidarity philanthropy circle, where we're funders are pooling grant making dollars into a pool, and then we're giving the power to the local leaders. In this case, it happens to be Boston, but you could do this anywhere on the planet. And the grassroots leaders are deciding how to deploy that money for public impact and best to stretch the dollars in their community. So yeah, participative grant making is a nice step, especially the more especially if the question, if you have looked into participatory grant making. That was the question. I thought I sort of referred to it, but yeah, I think it's a good step, a really good step from someone like me in my penthouse apartment making all the decisions, or my staff who are really good, hardworking people making all the decisions. Yes, participatory grant making can be done in a much more just way, but I'd put it in the middle. Regenerative, transformational, give the money to the people you're trying to help, set up processes and systems within their communities, and they will allocate the grant making or the impact investing capital. And that's what some of these Boston entities that are referred to do, and try to help build that capacity, Boston Ujima project, so that communities are deciding who gets invested in. This is now, impact investing dollars, notes where you get a fixed return. So, okay, I'll take a breath. What else should we talk about?
Oh, Amy, in addition to participatory grant making, can you talk a little bit about collaboration with direct investing in Africa, in some of these entrepreneurs, and how you go about that?
Okay, yeah, that is really, really fun. We were started Philanthropy just doing from a donor advised fund, and we didn't see any need to start a family foundation. It's a lot of work. We didn't really name it after us or anything, and we just thought, if you're giving to US 501c3s, why do we have to go through the extra complexity? So from the philanthropic side, the reason we started Umsizi Fund was because one of our first partners was African Leadership Academy, and they developed this amazing pipeline of young African leaders who were already entrepreneurs in their communities, social entrepreneurs, starting projects. William, the boy who harnessed the wind, couldn't afford school and started wind generated power for his village. These were entrepreneurial people. The problem happened was that as the entity got successful, those youth got wonderful scholarships to come to the US to study at fabulous universities. And then they got advised by their fabulous university teams, the next step for you is you're good at economics, you should get a PhD in economics. And then we know where that leads. Generally, some people go back to Africa, but they don't really have a path back to, professional jobs. They don't have the social capital. They don't know the people. Anyway, so we started Umsizi Fund so that we could make fellowship grants to individual Africans who were doing, social change work. They weren't, doing all commercial projects. They were doing social change work, like one of our grantees. And you can't really do that through a DAF, and most foundations can't do that, but we set it up with the IRS through attorneys. So we have the ability to do individual fellowship stipend grants. So to help young talent in Africa build their social ventures. So that's a whole different story, but we've invested in a bunch of different individuals, and that was really human capacity development more than looking for any return. That was all grants. On the flip side, we have invested in a lot of small businesses, some moringa oil business, tomato joss, health businesses. I can't remember all the names of them. Some of them, Sanergy, that is well known for sanitation, sanitation businesses. There are many, many businesses that have a social mission that we have also done direct investing in.
It's great, but how difficult is it? And we can certainly look for any of the participants to ask questions about that as well. The barriers to getting people to invest in these young entrepreneurs without a track record, first-time funds, and you are taking a big risk in investing in them. And how do you help mitigate some of those risks and make it more attractive for other donors? I'm sorry, other investors.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I've started getting involved in these networks. And I wish that that we had Sam, or it's my ex-husband who has a finance background. He's the one who started doing the direct investing. I've done more direct investing. Anyway, so I wouldn't say that I'm an expert. And that's where, I mean, I know I'm on here because I'm supposed to be an expert, but no, it is really hard. And people who I think have a finance background and have done are really comfortable with term structuring and deal structuring. You need some expertise at the table. That it's one thing to make a decision you want to invest in someone. It's another thing, or their business, and they are on some track record that you want to invest in. It's another thing to come up with founder-friendly terms. And that's what I mean, going back to the extractive to regenerative. If you're looking at investing just as, I'm going to try to help this business, like a traditional venture capital model, and I'm looking for these, quote, unicorns, these businesses that are going to make a huge amount of profit, and I, as an investor, am going to make a ton of money, that's a whole different thing. The newer path of really trying to figure out, how do you structure things in a way that aligns the incentives of the founder, the employees, and the investors, and whatever other stakeholders, the beneficiaries. That's where I'm most excited about. And that's why there are some breakthrough experiments. I've invested in some revenue-based financing models. We will be investing in one of the African Leadership Academy agricultural businesses as a PRI, and that's structured as a revenue-based model, where you're sharing when the company grows, they can pay you back. And so your incentives are aligned. Like, you want their business to grow. I mean, some do profit sharing, and I'm not an expert to say which is better in which situation. But I would say I wouldn't be doing direct investing if I didn't have advisors, colleagues, networks, where I knew that multiple skill sets were going to be at the table. I can bring capital. I can bring like blow wind in the sails of people, because I love to champion brave people. But I can't bring I know my limitations. I can't bring the term structuring skills. And there are posses and clubs of investors who are really skilled at that, who are mission aligned, who can help with that. But I wouldn't go out on my own to do that.
I've got to jump in here. It's not just about the structures. It's about your due diligence and taking risks and not being afraid to take these risks. And as one who has lost money in direct investing, but also has a finance background in private equity, I got to tell you, there's things over which you have no control. And it's heartbreaking when you think about one of these startups now, and some of the challenges they face, and how we're working around, and how we're learning lessons as we go. And one of my favorite stories is about an Indian company called Spring Health, and it is to provide affordable, clean water for people living in abject poverty in Bhubaneswar, India, the capital of the poorest state in India. And the whole idea, as we have learned from our Nobel Prize winning economists, Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo, who wrote the book about poor economics, the poor can pay. Right. But you just have to know not just the structures, Amy, but the science and technology to develop the goods and services that they can afford and that they want.
Yeah.
high quality, low cost. And with this Spring Health company, there's a very low cost and very effective process called chlorinization, electrochlorinization. Just take a concentrated volume of salt water and run a very low voltage current through it. And then basically what you have is bleach. And you put that in a big 10-liter vat, and you can sanitize it and deliver it door to door. Well, the exciting thing about that is not only are you helping the poor by providing them affordable, clean water, but you're also providing a distribution network. And there are now some of the biggest corporations that recognize, very much so, that the poor can become the next generation consumers.
Yep.
And why wouldn't you invest? But they need help understanding what works and what doesn't. And it's not just about the structures. And I love what you said about some of the ways to collaborate and to attract capital, but not just capital, also people with skills. And as you rightfully noted in humility, I am learning as well, and I want you to share some of your learnings. But we're all learning, and the traditional models of venture capital and private equity don't work for the poor.
No.
So, what are some of the lessons you?
Yeah, Pat, if it's okay with you, I see we have another question for either of us.
Sure.
Isn't it a key part of it to help people redefine risk? Also, to help investors redefine returns, even before looking at the technical expertise needed for more detailed structuring? Yes, if I didn't say that before, that's why I don't like that the model that says concessionary returns. That is, to me, an old mindset that it's trading off one for the other. But I have to plug my favorite impact investing podcast that I've listened to 3 times trying to prepare and absorb some of this genius that I could share with you. But better yet, listen to this podcast, Next Economy, which is a wonderful podcast. And the speaker is Mark Watson. And he actually, was a co-founder he helped institute the Boston Impact Initiative, which is now rolling out in place-based investing, integrated capital to help people of color run small businesses in successful ways. They're rolling that out, place-based investing, in 12 cities at this point in time. And it's something I'm going to look at investing in. But redefining risk, what he said is that the financial model of risk was defined in the 1930s, the one that we're all still using, the 1930s, the capital asset pricing model. Nobody asked me questions about that, but that it totally underestimated risk. It didn't factor in all these other elements of risk that we're all now trying to build back in. All the harm to the planet, the risk to the planet was never measured. The risk to the stakeholders at the bottom of the pyramid was never included or measured. All the things that philanthropists and all these good people on this call that we're trying to fix, in part because, yes, risk was never measured right and never defined right. And for some reason, the financial system just keeps talking about it. And I'll tell you a specific story about risk. When I shifted my focus last year to shift to racial justice investing, I have amazing impact advisors, and they are trying to protect me from undue risk, and they're fiduciaries and all that. And they said it's high risk to invest in first-time fund managers and first-time closings. And unfortunately, people have been locked out of the capital system. Who's going to give them capital? No one's going to ever give them capital if that's considered risk. So you have to balance that. So I said, this is what I mean about using your voice. I said, well, I don't need to look at risk that way. Like, I think it's a risk if we don't invest in people like that. And there's a lot of evidence that is, an uninvested segment of society. So if you're looking for alpha or whatever it is people talk about, investing in people who've been deprived of capital is good. It's good risk. So, but anyway, just to carry this example one step forward, when you find your voice, shit happens, because I'm not a finance person, but I'm committed to my money and my voice moving toward justice. And so my impact advisors, I checked in with them again last week. I said, I'm going to say this on a panel. Is this correct? Because I don't want to be making stuff up. And I said, what happened? When I said to you back in June of 2020, when I said I am shifting money to private funds led by people of color, I'm building my own pipeline to find them. I'm assuming you're going to want to help me build that too and figure it out. And so I just started ramming some things through their due diligence process, is the way it felt to me. Because I would just say, hey, unless you find a major skeleton in the closet, I'm investing in that. And what they said happened, I mean, it was very tense. What they actually said happened, looking a year back, is that my insistence drove things up into their pipeline. And then they would take a look at things that maybe would have just sat on their back burner for years because they defined it as too risky. And then the coolest thing is then some of their other clients invested in it, because once I used my battering ram, which was just my intention more than anything else, to ram some things through their due diligence process. This is much harsher language than they would use, but it kind of felt that way. It felt like I had to really be so bossy, and it didn't feel good. It didn't feel good at all, but I'm really grateful I did it. So the risk, so I'll maybe let you share on the return. The return, yeah, I don't care about the market rate return. I care about, is there some return so that I can, eat in the future, and only a piece of my capital has to do that. Is there some return? And is that return being distributed more appropriately than it used to be? So I'm investing in a lot of employee ownership models where, employees will have savings when they retire. So that return is getting distributed in different ways. If the business succeeds, I will get a little piece of it. The founders will get a piece of it. The employees, who really, let's be honest, do the hard work, the founders. And so, yeah, the return is totally different. Also, how I look at return.
I love it. So I have to jump in, and we all need to redefine risk, return, and impact. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I worry about is that every investment has an impact, either positive or negative. And we have to be on guard when we let down standards about return and risk and say, as you heroically just said, I don't care what my return is, as long as I can eat. I do care, because if a company goes bankrupt, not only have you disappointed your investors, but you've also let down all the beneficiaries, and the impacts go away. And so I really believe that we should strive for at least market rate returns, whatever that means. And I'm, as I said, there's no definition of that. But I love what you said, Amy, about what economists call externalities. So we have to start monetizing some of those risks and returns in our impact equation. And I think that the climate finance has really moved this forward. That little startup company that I work with in India, we're now getting more revenue from carbon credits than from selling affordable water. And the whole idea that we would put a value, a monetary value. I have a wonderful friend who did his PhD years ago in the anthropology of money. And when you start thinking about how we value things, and of course now with Bitcoin and all the cryptocurrencies, people are starting to think, what is money? It's power, and it's the ability to enable people. But I want to ask you, and then I want to turn to one of our other questions that just came in. But I want to ask you how you measure the impact. Never mind the risk and the return. You've dismissed those for now. But how do you measure the impact of what you're doing?
Yeah, I've been on a journey to shift capital. So, and I've done it pretty fast. So I won't be one of these. I find it actually quite annoying to try to align everything I'm doing to SDG sub goals, detail, detail, detail. That doesn't work for me. I'm glad that that works for some people, and it may work for larger, more formal organizations to align things like that and track it. I have the luxury of getting to be informal, but I really, I have a real commitment right now to reducing the racial wealth gap and to giving I invest in. So this is now coming back to the US because for the last year I really have shifted a lot of my time and investment in back at home here in the US. But how am I going to measure it? Yeah, 10 years from now, because these are private equity funds, these are private debt funds, these are employee stock option programs, these are investing in affordable housing and workforce training and all these things. Like, I'm not going to know for 10 years, but in 10 years, I'm going to want to see a number of measures that, people of color who weren't in home ownership situations, or I'm investing in an amazing new fund called Black Star Stability Fund, where they're converting these horrific contract for deed housing contracts that the homeowners think they're getting mortgages, but they're not. They're not earning equity. Anyway, they're going to convert. Some bold, smart real estate financiers are going to flip that to being mortgages, and people are going to immediately get equity. And it's all really focused on people of color who've been deprived assets for a lot of reasons, redlining, et cetera. So it's not, I wish Sam were here for this one because he probably helps a lot of families who are wrestling with that. How are you going to measure it? How are you going to prove it? I know one family that's probably involved in the impact, that they're trying to monetize every impact measure into dollars and cents. So there's a huge continuum. I would say I'm on the more relaxed continuum because I'm again going back to my philosophy that I did in philanthropy. I'm not a grant maker. I'm not scattering a bunch of money around a bunch of places. I am finding partners who are transforming their societies, who are experts in a particular topic area. In this Black Star Stability Fund, they're real estate people, and they are men of color by and large. And they've worked in the public sector, and they've seen it from all angles. They're seasoned professionals. I'm trusting them to tell me, how do you measure that this gets improved, that people own houses and people get equity?
I've got to jump in. I have a wonderful friend who taught me the things that matter can't be measured, and the things that can be measured don't matter.
Yeah.
And I love what you just
Except
said.
I don't think that's true, because 10 years from now, I'm going to be able to look, did the investments that I made, are more people having good employment with good income, with retirement savings? Are they buying houses? No, in the short term, if you're thinking the quarterly measurement capitalist system that we're used to, you're right. Then I agree with that quote. But 10 years from now, I'm going to be able to say, like, oh my gosh, all these amazing fund managers that I've invested in, some of them failed, some of them succeeded. And we got stuff done.
Does anybody want to live in that public housing? Do they have security? Do they have transportation? Do they have clean water running in and out of the buildings? In schools, I know you work in education in Africa. The enrollment of skills and their students. The enrollment may be going up. There's an output. But are the students really learning what they need for a livelihood ahead? And you can go on and on. So I totally agree with you. I'm not abandoning the measurements, but just make sure that we check with the beneficiaries, please, about how they measure the impact.
Yep. So we did get another question.
Yeah. So you read it out, would you?
how do you speak to donors about impact investing? What would your response be if a donor said to you, I donate to social justice organizations directly. Why should I do impact investing?
Okay, you answer that one.
Oh, Sam would love to take that one on. I wish he were here.
I know.
Basically, it's this whole thing, know what you own. So if you're a foundation, you're an individual, whoever you are and whatever assets you have, it's great that all of us who are doing grant making are helping these nonprofit entities. That's a beautiful gift, a purposeful life. It makes a big difference. I gave you that number at the beginning, that 6% of my assets when I stepped into being an impact investor were dedicated to public good. So that was social impact, and that was grant making, that was some PRIs. That means what's happening with that other 94% people? What's happening with that money? What is it causing? What are the unintended harm? What is once you see what the capitalist system, if you're not steering it actively, what the capitalist system will be doing with your savings, you're causing harm in really dramatic ways at much larger scale. So for me, it's really not about, donating is great. That's a wonderful thing. But you're not looking at the bigger lever you have. Let's think about these foundations and the size of these endowments. And, if you have a traditional financial advisor, they're going to be, and the investment policy statement is worded in a way that it's maximize, returns or have market rate returns so that the foundation can live on in perpetuity and blah, blah, blah. If that's the goal, you're in Exxon. Wake up. You're in Exxon. You're in all these stocks because the financial system wants to manage risk and diversify. And the stock market has been the best bet for a long time, public equities. So I don't know if this is, I'll leave it to you, Pat, but for me, this is the part where it's hard for me to stay patient and calm, and because I had my blinders on. I didn't know what my 94%, the harm my 94% was doing. And I felt like a hero because I was doing all this wonderful, fabulous work in Africa with the 6%. I didn't know. Once you start seeing what that 94% is doing while you sleep or while you're awake, it's funding private prison construction on the border that separates families. Unless you step in to be an activist around your money, you're causing harm and you don't know it.
Yeah, and I think to the question, or how do you engage with these nonprofits who think it's enough to contribute to social justice causes? Yes, thank you. We need that base of capital, but just I would ask those people to think about the question you posed a minute ago. Where is your money going? That you have invested in passive fixed income and public equity stocks. You may be very surprised to learn that, yes, you're doing a lot on philanthropy and contributing to social, but on the other hand, your money, your capital that's earning you all those returns may actually be contributing to some of the causes.
There's a kind of mind-blowing article that Morgan Simon at Candide sent me. When I asked her about this panel, I said, how would I tell people if there are people on the call who don't yet really understand what their capital is doing, that's just sitting in banks or sitting in public stock funds or sitting in the traditional capitalist system? She sent me this article from 2007 that was about the Gates Foundation. And of course, they've changed their assets since then. But the article talked about a child in Nigeria who had a eye problem and went to some clinic, and that clinic was funded by the Gates Foundation. So isn't that fantastic that they're helping this child get better health care? And at that time, they were spending about $240 million on healthcare interventions around the world. At the same time, in 2007, They had $438 million invested in the 4 major oil companies that were actually doing production in Nigeria, that were spitting toxins into the water and into the air, that was actually causing the people to be sick. So once you've kind of seen, that was an LA Times article. Unfortunately, because I'm on all these I'm on this app, I can't figure out how to put it in the chat bot. But once you've started seeing those stories, that it's a matter of putting our blinders on. We're not seeing what's happening. Once you start taking the blinders off, as a people of conscience who are committed, like, how can we not? But I will say one thing. I have great sympathy. I'm in an unusual situation. I am the asset owner and the decision maker. And I get that that is like a very rare luxury. And so I did spend a tiny bit of time thinking about, for those of you who are really committed to this and you have all these barriers around getting other people to see it or believe it. And I think what that's latest question is, how do you engage with a nonprofit who has an endowment to look at impact investing and beyond the simple financial returns metric for their endowment? I interviewed several people before this call who work for foundations. So we had a lot of advice. They had a lot of good ideas. Okay, I'm saying we have 10 minutes, so I'll say this and then we'll have some wrap up or whatever Pat wants to close with. But I wanted to share with you the advice they gave to me, because I recognize I'm in an unusual situation, and many of you are really facing some really legitimate barriers to getting people to do this stuff. So one, they said, is, we got to break down the silos. So if program staff who really knows what's needed in the communities and really has such vision and commitment for making transformational justice work in the world is totally separate from the investment people, then we have to break down some of those silos. And a few ways to do that, I can give you some examples. One is have a workshop with this transform finance, framework, and get the discussion going. Have people say, oh, where do you think we are? Some of them will say, oh, we're really restorative, and some will say we're extractive. Start the dialogue. Another thing I'd say is one of the people I interviewed, because they're very forward thinking on social justice in Boston, is the Hyams Foundation. And I asked people there, they are starting a committee that brings together program people and investment people, and they're going to start doing PRIs and MRIs together, bringing those two sides of the house together. So recoverable grants, things that could be invested from the grant making side or the investment side. And then you can ask questions about people's investment policy statement. All foundations working with investment advisors or any fiduciary of assets will have signed some investment policy statement. Ask to make that transparent. Ask to make that more visible, because many of us are rewriting our investment policy statement so that they're capturing the mission alignment with the foundation, or the mission alignment, not just traditional financial metrics. So I'll stop there, but there are a number of ways. Let me see if I missed anything really major. I do have a list over on this computer that I wanted you to think about, for those of you who really have, find allies. Somebody told me, just like any movement building work, you got to understand the power dynamics, you got to find your allies. And then this is very important, be risk-taking capital. There's a lot of need for loan guarantees and other things like that Pat mentioned at the beginning when she was talking about innovations. Instead of being the foundation that says, oh, I'm going to go into this and I'm going to expect a 5 to 10% return, you can go in as the risk-taking capital and make it a grant, a recoverable grant, that if there is a problem with the business model or the execution of it or whatever, it's the foundation, the philanthropic side, that takes the hit. Because if you do that, you're going to unlock all this other impact investment. So I guess I'd stop there. But there's so many barriers that I wanted to help you guys try to problem solve around.
Excellent. And I think as we approach the end of the panel, what I really want to hear from you, and I'm happy to answer it as well, is what you personally are doing. I totally understand what you say. You won't know the full impact for 10 years with some of these direct investments, but what are you planning to do next? And you are moving toward 100% impact. Hooray! But tell us about some of the things you have in mind.
Yay!
You've got a lot going on, and tell us what you're doing now in impact investing.
I'm very excited. I already mentioned I'm very excited about place-based investing. When I look at, I'm not a historian or a capitalist historian, but when you look back to how small towns used to run decades ago, I mean, some things were horrible. They were unjust or racist. They did horrible things, but some things worked in that they were communities. The same people took the mayor and the doctor and the factory worker all had their kids at the same schools, and they were a community, and they were committed to the well-being of that community. Unfortunately, I was a part of this disaggregating globalization system that now people and staff are numbers. They're numbers. They're not people. So my intuition, and I'm tutored by really experts like Deborah Fries, Mark Watson, lots of others who are looking at place-based investing. How do you bring the networks together, the government players, all the entities, the foundations, the investors in a community to help really drive the model of justice we want to see? So that's related to then doing more blended capital. Then those different entities can bring different types of capital to really unlock some real transformative things in a community. I'm looking at, and I'm stepping in more to political voice than I used to. And that doesn't mean necessarily candidates, but I was asked to try to help get the word out to financial advisors and asset owners. I don't think foundations can take positions on political things, but that there's going to be a really participative budgeting process proposal in Boston on the ballot this fall, that we are one of the few major cities that doesn't have a participative city budgeting process. It's question one. And so I am getting the word out that I'm getting the word out to others who are in this impact side that we can use our voice also for political change. We can sign things that will help move the bigger ecosystem to justice. So it's impact investing, but it's looking at other power. I'm already mentioned, I could not be more excited about cooperative ownership models. I've invested in a couple. And then I have in my pipeline, I have several investments in community-owned and managed solar projects, because then people will have power self-sufficiency. So it's a lot, but it's wonderful.
Amy, we got to collaborate. I love it, because a lot of the things that you just mentioned, and I hope other people on this panel discussion want to learn more as well. And we can work together on a lot of this stuff we're all learning. But I'm going to answer very quickly because we only have 3 minutes left. So one of my big priorities is faith-based investing. Not just with the Catholic Church, but my good friend Julie Hammerman started a Jewish impact investing collaborative. There's a Muslim collaborative. There are the Methodists, the Episcopalians, with whom Sam Bonsey, our other panelist, is working. And I think that this alignment of values and investing is very strong in a lot of these faith-based, and they have capital. So I think that's important. I love what you said about blended finance. I really want to find those innovative solutions that work, not just for returns, but also for impacts and, as you said, taking risks and, exploring as we go and trying to quantify some of these externalities. And I'm thrilled about what you said about the cooperatives and the worker-based enterprises. Oh my goodness, that goes back 50 or 60 years. And it works, getting that local engagement and getting the people who are most directly affected by racial injustice and inequity to be part of the solution. And not just the people with the venture capital skills or the structuring skills, but the people who are living through these horrible intersecting crises that we had. And finally, again, I really want to pick up on the point you mentioned about the ecosystem. It's all interrelated. And we need to use our skills. We need philanthropy, we need impact investing, and we need all of the innovative skills and brilliant minds to help us move forward. So we are out of time. And Amy, I just can't thank you enough. It's been a privilege having this time with you. And please, let's follow up. And anyone else on this call who wants to collaborate with us going forward, please contact us. And we would love to share our passion with you. Amy, any concluding remarks?
I'm so grateful. I'm seeing so many of you still hanging in there, and that's just a lot of listening. So thank you so much. And I think we want to make sure that we're taking a quick break. You guys know what's happening next. And then there are thematic clusters that are coming up next that people can join. And Pat, thanks so much for shepherding us to try to provide something that might be of value to people. And I hope it's inspiring, if nothing else. Like it does take courage, it takes effort, and it's so worth it. You know how you guys feel about your favorite program partners that you're making grants to, and you're partners with them forever, and you see them growing and expanding. I feel the same way about impact investing. I feel like it's really a gratifying, meaningful, purposeful endeavor.
Well, thank you, Amy. Thank you for Need, TBI, all of the people who have helped make this possible. And we need all the rest of you on this call, whatever you can do. Not everybody can do everything, but everybody can do something. And there are a lot of us that are more than happy to help you along the way. And we look forward to you helping us as well. So that's it. Move on, and let's see if we can build a better future together.
Let's do it. Bye.
All right.